can watch, of course, on his programme On the Money, 1 p.m, Monday to Friday. Liam, explain this whole thing to me, please.
You've focused on the unemployment the employment numbers, the unemployment numbers. Unemployment now is 3.9%. God, when I was a kid, it was up at 10% back in the 1980s. So that's really good news. The labour market is tight in the sense that there's lots of vacancies. So if you want to work, for the most part, then you can work. Of course, it's not the same in all parts of the country, but there is work out there. The bad news is, you mentioned it, Patrick, wages. Average wages during the year to January, they went up by 3.8%. Now, that sounds not bad, but when you consider that inflation in the year to January was 5.5%, the cost of living rise, that means, on average, what we call real wages after inflation actually fell. It's the biggest fall in real wages since 2014, and in my view, it's going to cause protests, it's going to cause industrial action, particularly in the public sector. It's going to cause the government a proper headache.
Wow. Also, Liam, do we have any information on what kinds of jobs there are? I remember after the 2008 economic crash, we were talking about this earlier, that we were told, you know, that there's a jobs boom, but oftentimes there were zero-hour contracts, kind of precarious, low-paid employment. Are we seeing quality jobs? We're seeing
a bit of both, and there's definitely a shortage of tech workers, you know, people who code, people who work in sort of fintech, cutting edge stuff. There's definitely a shortage, famously, of HGV drivers, not least because DVLA, the licensing authority, they're still being very, very slow about processing even renewals of licences. And we read about that a lot, don't we, in terms of supply chain problems in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. I'm always conscious here on GB News, in all my broadcasting and my writing, as I know you two are, it's not an even picture across the UK. We are the most regionally unequal country in the developed world. And so while there's plenty of work in London and the South East, there's a lot of work in the North West. There's quite a lot of work in parts of the North East as well. There are parts of the country where there isn't that much work. So for people hearing us sitting in London saying there's lots of work, unemployment's really low, if they're chucking things at the TV or the radio, I understand why.
Yeah, completely, absolutely. I mean, you've led the way, really, I think it's fair to say, on the cost of living crisis, etc. And this is going to compound it, isn't it, really? And so, you know, you mentioned there about protests. You mentioned there about, I suppose, civil unrest, I suppose. Do you think this is actually a real possibility? Because from where I'm sitting now, if people just can't pay stuff and they've got kids, you're choosing between paying your bill or feeding your kids. Well, there's only one choice, isn't there, really?
Well, look, GB News has led the way. We've been talking about the cost of living crisis since last autumn, pretty much since we launched last summer. It was one in the early editions of On the Money. The first one we did back in September was why there's going to be a cost of living squeeze. We've got this ongoing Beat the Squeeze campaign, not just on my show. I know you guys cover it all the time, and that's fabulous. So GB News is trying to highlight these cost of living issues. I don't think the political and media class broadly understands the extent of these cost of living issues. I don't think they understand what it's going to mean in April when the average household utility bill goes up by 54%, by 700 quid.
I'm dreading it.
And that's before you include the increase in energy and food costs because of this Ukraine crisis. It's not all doom and gloom. Look, the oil price today is back near $100 a barrel. It was up at 130 this time last week. Maybe the markets are sensing that this Russia-Ukraine conflict may come to an end. But when I was a lad in the 70s and 80s, there was lots of industrial action. There was lots of strikes. I'll be talking about that on my show at 1 o'clock. But there's less unionisation now, Trade unions aren't as powerful as they were. Just a quarter of workers are in a trade union compared to a half back in the late 70s. But in the public sector, nurses, doctors, teachers, firefighters, trade unions are still very strong, and they're not going to take this fall in real wages lying down.
Right.